Thank you. That's really helpful. I'd like to ask a related question now that's coming in from, again, a couple of different attendees. And here I'm perhaps asking you to step back a little bit and describe for those who are maybe not as familiar with some of the work you're arguing against, what the recent advances in the study of early Buddhist texts has meant, particularly the comparative studies with Chinese parallels to early collections of Buddhist discourses, uh, the Sanskrit Dirghagama uh, portions, the Gandhari manuscripts, etc. And part of what I'm hearing in the questions submitted is to take, for instance, the example of something like the Satipatthana Sutta that has parallels sort of within the Pali tradition in different kinds of formulas, as you mentioned, as well as a discourse that has parallels in other traditions. How would you first of all, describe how someone like Bhikkhu Analayo approaches the study of that, given the new advances in the comparative study of early Buddhist texts, and how does your view of studying a discourse like that differ? Does that question make sense? Sorry, there's kind of two parts of it, but
Yeah,
I think
pretty
it'd
much.
just be
Pretty
helpful to
much.
fill out a little more context for the audience.
Sure. Okay. So take the Satipatthana. I don't remember how many versions we have of it. Um, I think there are two Chinese versions, if I'm not mistaken. But potentially, I mean, if you take Analayo, Analayo is an incredible scholar. He's written, more than all of us in Buddhist studies, in the past 20 years. And he really believes in this comparative work. Why does he believe in it? Because he thinks there's an origin out there. I mean, of course there is to some degree, right? The Buddha must have been, I mean, I'm not the kind of scholar who thinks, who doubts the existence of the Buddha, like, some scholars like to say. I don't know if the Buddha is what we think he was, that's another question. So then he gave teachings, right? Are the texts the records of these teachings for a guy like Analayo? Yes, this is what tradition is trying to do. It's trying to preserve, to keep the words of the Buddha and to record the life events of the Buddha. Okay? And then, how are we going to know what those first words were? We're going to take all the available versions that we have, compare them to each other, and see what makes better sense. Certain elements we could assume were introduced. Say, if they're like, there's the question of what's like kind of the influence of more devotional elements. Scholars like to say that comes later, which is kind of assuming what you want to prove, but that's, and that's always the issue with these. It always comes up. But so we have different versions, we'll compare them, we'll see where they agree, and when they differ, we'll see which version makes better sense, and we'll take that as a kind of, as close as we can get to the original. Okay? My argument, and then this has been practiced for a long time, and there especially was a real big boom in Buddhist studies about like, about in the early 2000s, when all these texts were coming up from Gandhara. And there we had, real texts from 2,000 years ago. That's not that far from the Buddha. And so it's a different language where they're not, they don't understand Gandhara like we understand Pali or Sanskrit or even Chinese, but nevertheless, these are texts that can be read. and compare it to the other text, and then we have a version, because say we're reading, the text I'm reading are very late editions, 18th, 19th, 20th century, so here this takes us really close to the Buddha. So scholars were like really optimistic, we have like a strong verification for what the early tradition might have been like. And you know what Richard Solomon said to me not that long ago, he's like the main guy, number one person doing this Gandhari stuff. He said, we've been going down a dead end. He was very happy about this kind of approach that I'm advocating, because the texts don't compare all that well. Now, let me just kind of be my own devil's advocate for a minute, okay? When I read an Aleo's work and I see where the texts agree, I learn a lot. Because you see that in many cases, there is some kind of text there. There is some kind of grid or an agreement, and that's an important fact in itself. And of course, the early Buddhists also wanted to preserve the tradition. I'm not denying that in any way. I'm just saying that kind of approach, this kind of more kind of linear and kind of essentialist or historicist approach has dominated the study of Buddhism. And that's not what people do with texts, certainly not religious texts, where they really, really care about things. So they want the story to be good. They don't only want it. It's like, people aren't reporters. It's not the news. And even the news isn't the news, as we know, right? So people are telling stories. That's what they do. And if they weren't telling good stories, we wouldn't be here talking about the Buddha. That's what gets people going. And then, so my argument here is two things. First, there is no core in a strong sense that each discourse is like a moment. Some discourses may be that or may contain that, not be that, but they may contain that, but most of them don't, like the vast majority don't. And that's an essentialist assumption I think is mistaken. And it's a cognitive model that is wrong for the tradition. It's wrong for most traditions, but it's especially wrong for Buddhism. It's like reading the Gospels and trying to figure out what really happened in Jesus' life. You give that up after a while. And then the other problem is that each version, each text we do find, the fact that the texts don't compare all that well is no less important than that they do compare. Because the tradition seems to have cherished the expressivity, cherished the personal reworking of the Dharma, been really interested in some monk, mastering the tradition and telling us how he understood it, and giving us his Satipatthana or his Mahaparinibbana or his any text. And then why compare the different versions, which are kind of, those are not necessarily performances. They may be performances in some cases. There may be literary versions. They may be philosophical, scholarly syntheses. They may be kind of, works of joint recitation. They can be lots of things. I don't think there's one answer to what they are. What I want to open up is the option for plurality, for multiplicity. I think is true not only about the text, is true about the meditation, it's true about the philosophy, it's even true about liberation. There's lots of different understandings that were very important.
Thank you. I think that's a wonderful place for us to end here this evening. I know there are more questions, many more things that I'd love to be able to ask you and engage you on. But I think this is the time we have, and the way you summed up the core of your argument just now, I thought was especially cogent and evocative for all of us here. So if everyone here could join me in thanking you again for your fantastic lecture and for your engaging response to our questions. I feel really fortunate that we had this chance to spend this time with you today, Professor Schulman.
Thanks so much. It's really wonderful speaking to you all, and thanks again for the opportunity, and to the Kenza Foundation, and to you, Trent. And I hope to see you all soon.
Thank you again. So before we end, I just wanted to draw your all attention to the next talk in the series by Dr. Naomi Appleton of the University of Edinburgh. She'll be speaking on narrative Buddhology, explorations of Indian Buddhist literature. Her talk will take place on Saturday, March 19th of 2022. And if you're on the Kensei Foundation mailing list, you'll receive more info about Dr. Appleton's lecture in early March. And as you may know from looking at the schedule, we'll soon have talks from Venerable Professor K.L. Dhamajyoti of the Buddha Dharma Center of Hong Kong. That particular lecture will be in Chinese. We'll also have a lecture in May from Professor Jens Uwe Hartmann of Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich. And as always, visit kenseifoundation.org/events and also kenseifoundation.org/the Goodman Lectures for more info as the lecture series will continue throughout 2022. So thank you all again for joining us. We hope to see you again soon. May you all be safe and well.